Back when I was a kid, I remember that we moved into this new house when I was around 12. It was a fairly average house, but nicer than the one that we had been living in. It was my parents, two older sisters, and me living there. The house also came with a pretty nice backyard. It was not all that big, but it was mostly fenced in and had a large area of grass. There were some trees and bushes along the sides and back of it. I used to like to go outside in the front and backyard all the time. I was often playing some kind of sport or something. So I remember that not long after moving in, I was outside one night and about to go in. I would usually not stay outside after dark, and the sun had just set. I was going to go through the backyard though, and I saw this man standing in the back corner of it. He was at the far end next to a couple of bushes and one of the trees. I didn't know who he was, but I assumed him to be a neighbor, possibly the one who lived next door or behind us. I found it strange though, how he was just kind of standing there in the corner of our yard, and when I saw him, he was just looking at me. I decided to go inside at that point. Once I got in though, I didn't see him back there anymore when I looked out of the window. I didn't bother to tell my parents or anything, because I didn't really think that it was that big of a deal. But I saw the guy several more times after that. Each time, it would be when I was outside, either right before it got dark outside or right after, and the guy was always in that same area of the backyard. Well, one afternoon, I happened to be at home by myself. I don't remember where everyone else was, but I know that there was a knock on the front door. I already was not planning on answering it, but I decided to see who was there. When I walked towards the front of the house, I saw that same guy standing on the front step. I still assumed him to be a neighbor. I wasn't really sure what he wanted or why he was here though. I walked away and did not answer. The guy didn't keep knocking or anything, and he soon left. The next time that I saw the guy was probably just a few nights after that. I remember that it was late at night this time. I was going to bed and inside of my bedroom. Just about everybody in our house had already gone to bed. I remember looking out of my window into the backyard though. When I did, I actually saw somebody walking through. I looked closer and noticed it to be the same guy. This time was different though, because he wasn't just standing in the far back corner, but actually in the yard. He was walking through, and then I saw him approaching the back door to our house. He tried to open it, and then he stood around there for a while. I didn't know what to do, and I was now really creeped out. The man ended up walking away though, and back over to the end of the yard, and then went into the bushes. I got up and went to my parents to tell them. When I did, they ended up calling the police. After that, I just remember that the police got there, and soon after, several more police cars arrived. I ended up finding out that they found the man in the neighbor's backyard. Apparently, he had been living in our next door neighbor's shed in their backyard without anybody knowing. He had tried breaking into several houses. Nobody in the neighborhood knew who he was. I'm really glad that I saw him when I did. I'm not sure what his intentions were, but the next door neighbor had no idea that the guy had been living in his shed. This story takes place when I moved into my first ever house after living in apartments for many years. I was excited to have my own house with a small yard as well. The house was not the nicest one ever, but it was decent. The neighborhood was pretty typical. There were a bunch of houses on both sides of a quiet street with fairly small yards. After moving in, I was working on unpacking everything one day, and I got a knock at the front door. I went over and saw a woman standing on my front step. I answered the door to her, and she said that she saw that I had just moved in. She had a box of cookies and gave them to me as a welcome gift. I thought that it was really nice of her, and I told her thanks. We talked for a short time, and she told me that she was my neighbor and lived down the street. Then she left, and I went back inside. I remember that a few days later she showed up at my house again. This time, the woman asked me if she could borrow a screwdriver and said that she didn't have one. I did, so I went and got it and gave it to her. We chatted for a very short time about basic stuff, and then she left. I remember when she was walking away though, I was expecting her to live maybe next door or right across the street, but I saw her turn and walk down the street, and then go so far down that she went out of my sight. I didn't even see what house she went in. I still assumed her to live on the street, but I was kind of surprised that she didn't live closer. So the next day she brought the screwdriver back. When she did, I asked her where she lived exactly. She just told me that she lived down the street, not too far. I remember asking which house, and she just kind of pointed and said you couldn't quite see it from here. So a short time later, she left again. I watched her walk away, and I even walked a little farther out to see where she was going. Well, she literally walked to the very end of the street and then left the block going to another street and went out of my sight. I was very confused. Why did she keep coming to my house? And how would she even know that I moved in if she didn't even live on my street? So I remember that one of the days after that, I was mowing my lawn. It was a weekend, so my next door neighbor happened to be mowing his lawn as well. We both finished at around the same time and met each other. We got to talking a little bit, and he said that he had been living in the neighborhood for over 20 years. I mentioned the lady to him and I asked him who exactly she was, and after I described her in the best detail that I could to the guy, he said he had no idea who I was talking about. He thought that the situation seemed strange. So for a few days after that, I didn't see the woman or anything. But then, one day, I had work in the city. I worked in a pretty typical office building downtown. So the really weird part is that after work, I was walking down the street to get to my car. I saw this car parked on the side of the road amongst many others. But I saw a woman behind the wheel of one of them who appeared to be the same woman who was my neighbor. She was sort of far away. She appeared to look at me for a second and then look away. And when she was looking away, I didn't have a good view of her at all. I kept going and I soon made it to my car. I was not at all 100% sure that this was the same woman, but it sure looked a lot like her, and I tried to tell myself that I was just being paranoid. Well, I saw her again several nights later. It was pretty late at night, and I was staying up much later than usual. I remember that I was watching this one movie that was on TV. So when it was over and I was finally going to bed, I happened to walk past the living room window in the front side of the house. As I did, I saw someone walking on the sidewalk out front. It was a woman, and it was strange for anybody to be out this late. But when I looked closer, I saw that it was the same woman who I kept seeing. I was so confused by this that I was just standing there staring at her. She then turned and looked at me. When she saw me, even from far away, I saw a surprised look come over her face. Then she started walking off rather quickly. I actually went over to my front door and opened it up. I was so confused that I wanted to just ask her what was going on. When I opened the door, I went outside and stepped out into the yard. The woman turned and looked over her shoulder as she was walking away. I called out to her, asking what was going on. She did not stop, but instead turned back and started running. She ran out into the street, and I got to the end of my yard, but I didn't leave my property. I was not going to chase after her, but I wanted to see where she was going. The woman then ran to a car that was parked on the side of the street, across and a few houses down from mine. Then she got inside and quickly drove away. I was left as confused as ever. If she was my neighbor, why would she be driving away from here? I just went back inside and went to bed. And surprisingly, after that, I never saw the woman again. I'm still very confused about it. I'm not sure who she is or what she wanted. I have an interesting experience to tell from when I moved into an apartment a few years ago. So I moved into what I would describe as a pretty typical apartment building. It had several floors, and I was on the second floor. After moving everything in and stuff, I had been living there for just a few days when the strange thing started. One night, pretty late, I heard a knocking at my front door. This took me by surprise, and it seemed pretty weird to get a visitor at this time of night. I walked over to the front door and looked through the peephole. When I did, I saw no one. I was very confused for a few moments, but after that, I figured maybe someone was at the wrong apartment or something. But then about 10 minutes later, there was knocking again. I was closer to the door this time and started walking over. When I did, I could hear the sound of somebody walking away rather quickly. I opened up the door right away this time, and nobody was there. I looked around and didn't see anyone, but whoever it was would have had enough time to go around the corner by then. I figured at that point that maybe it was a prank or somebody just messing with me. I wasn't sure that anybody even knew that I was living here yet, but what else could it be? Nothing else happened for the rest of that night though, but the very next night, pretty much the exact same thing happened. There was more knocking at the door, and when I went to see who was there, whoever had knocked was completely gone. They came back like 5 minutes later, and did it again for a third time several minutes after that. So the next day when I was leaving for work, I saw one of my neighbors down the hall leaving as well. We said hi, and he seemed friendly. I got curious, so I brought up what had happened. I asked him if he had ever had people knocking on his door at night and running away, or if this was like some kind of initiation or hazing into moving in the building. He said no, he never had that happen and he was not aware of it. That night, it happened yet again. It was basically the same as all the other times. I actually tried to see who it was by getting up really fast and running to the door, but I didn't make it quite on time, because whoever was knocking had a head start. I didn't see them at all. However, the next night, I was able to see something. They knocked again, which would now be the fourth night in a row if you lost count. After the first knocking, I looked through the peephole, and of course, like always, they were gone. But I figured they would be back. They had to. So I camped out right there, just staring through the peephole. I was looking through the peephole for like 5 minutes straight. Then, all of a sudden, I saw this man come into view. It was just some random guy who I hadn't seen before. He knocked on the door, and right when he did, I opened it up. As I did though, he very quickly sprinted away. I called out to him, but he was around the corner before I knew it. So now I had seen who was behind this. I didn't know who he was or why he was doing it, but I wondered if he would be back. After that night though, he didn't come back for the rest of the evening, and he wasn't there the next night either. The next few nights, there were no knocks on my door at all. Things were fine for several days, until one day when I was leaving my apartment, I saw a bunch of junk mail on the front step right outside my door. The mail did not get delivered to our doors, but everybody had a mailbox in the mailroom. It was a bunch of advertisements and all that kind of junk mail that was right outside my door. It seemed to be like a month's worth of it. I was very confused. I picked it up and took it to the garbage down the hallway. I realized that the same person who kept knocking on my door was probably messing with me again. Before I put it in the trash, I had an idea, and I looked through the junk mail until I saw something with a mailing address on it. I found one, and I got a name of a guy. After getting the name, a quick internet search matched it with the same guy who I had seen in the hallway. For some reason, this guy was messing with me. I ended up going to the office and reporting him. After that, he didn't mess with me anymore. I'm not sure if he got in trouble or what, but I later found out that apparently one of his friends was trying to move into the building. I guess I got the last unit that his friend wanted, and his friend did not end up moving in, so he was mad at me. I had no clue about that though. What was I supposed to do? I'm just glad that he stopped messing with me. This happened a few years ago now. During this time, my wife and I moved into a new house. We only lived there for a year, and it was a rental house, but it was pretty nice. We moved because of my job, and I would get relocated from time to time. My job also helped us to find the house, and when we moved in, it was our first time seeing it other than online. The house had some furniture in it already, which was nice because we didn't have much at the time. We brought what we did have, and when we first got inside of the house, we both liked it a lot. The neighborhood seemed cool, the house had a nice backyard, and the layout was good. There was a main floor, an upstairs, and then an attic. We unpacked the things that we had, which took a few hours. Then I remember that we went shopping at some local stores to get some things like food and stuff. After getting back, the rest of the day was pretty normal. However, that night, I was downstairs and my wife had been upstairs. She came down and told me that she heard a strange noise in the attic. I thought that maybe it was a squirrel or bird or some kind of an animal, but really I didn't know. When I asked her what it sounded like, she said that it was loud. I walked upstairs and to the door of the attic. It was towards the end of the hallway, and I had never bothered to go in it yet, neither had my wife. We didn't really plan on putting anything up there. So I walked over to the attic, and first I listened. I didn't hear anything at all. After standing there for a few moments with it being quiet, my confidence went up. I was sure that my wife was just hearing some small animal or something. So I opened up the door and then started walking up the stairs. It was a very narrow staircase, and when I got to the top, I saw a very small room with a low ceiling. But as soon as I had reached the top, I also heard a noise. I looked to the back corner to see a man coming out from behind a large and empty cardboard box. The guy had really short hair and a bit of a beard. He came walking straight for me, and it was one of the last things that I was expecting to see. I quickly turned around and went back down the stairs. I had absolutely nothing to defend myself with in case this guy was dangerous, and the way that he was heading towards me made it seem like he was. The man did not say anything, but neither did I. I went all the way down the stairs as fast as I could. Then I left the attic, closing the door behind me. My wife, who was at the top of the stairs, saw me leaving in a hurry and asked what it was. I told her just to run. I could hear the guy coming down the attic stairs. My wife and I went down the staircase to the main level of the house and immediately left. We called the police, but as we were doing so, we heard the back door open and close. We couldn't see into the backyard, but were hoping and thinking that the guy left. We did not return to inside the house until the police got there. When they searched around, they didn't find anybody and the man was gone, but we were able to go back inside safely. The man somehow got inside of the house, which had been vacant for a while before we moved in. I'm really glad that he didn't cause any real harm. Several years ago, I moved into a new apartment. This one was nicer than the previous apartment that I had been living in, and I was excited to live there. I got a one-bedroom place on the first floor of the building in an apartment complex that had a few different buildings. So after moving in, within probably 2 weeks of living there, I remember that I got this strange text message. I did not know who it was from because I didn't recognize the number. The text just said hi, and I ignored it, assuming it to be a wrong number or something. Several days later though, I got another text. It was from the same number, but it said, "I can see you." I found this to be more suspicious now. I wondered if this was actually a wrong number or maybe something else, but quite possibly it was just a prank from a random number. I texted back asking who it was. They did not respond though. I got up and went over to my window and closed the blinds. It was nighttime, and I had a very large window that led out to a patio. Next to that was a small courtyard that connected to the other apartment building. I wondered if somebody could in fact see me, but I didn't really think so. I didn't get any more texts for the rest of that night. Either the next night or the one after, I actually got a call though. When I saw the number was calling me, I hesitated before answering, but my curiosity got the better of me. Even though I was really nervous, I picked up. I said hello, and there was a pause before I heard a whisper of a man on the other end. He just said that he knew where I lived and that I was home. I didn't know what to make of this. I tried asking him who it was, but then he hung up on me. By now, I was really creeped out about this whole situation. After that call though, for a few days, there was nothing. Everything was fine and there were no texts or calls. I was starting to forget about it until late at night when there was a random knock at my door. I was in the other room and instantly thought that the knocking might be connected to the strange texts and stuff. I didn't want to answer it, so I didn't. The knocking continued on and off for about a minute or two. When it finally stopped, after a couple of minutes, I got up and checked the door as well as the hallway. There was nobody there anymore. I was really nervous, but I didn't go to the police or anything. For the next few days, nothing happened, and things were actually fine for a few weeks after that. It had all stopped, and I was really happy about it, but I didn't know why. Then I ended up finding out something crazy. There was this guy who lived in the apartment complex, and he had been arrested for stalking a woman who lived in the next building from mine. When I heard the details of the case, it sounded very similar to me. He had texted and called her repeatedly before somehow entering her apartment one night. She managed to escape and call police, leading to the guy being caught. When I heard this, I realized why it had stopped, because the man was caught. I'm really glad that they got him when they did.
Years ago, I moved into an older apartment. It was pretty cheap, and the building only had 8 units in it. There were 4 on the ground floor and 4 up above it, all of them opening up to the outside. It was really all that I could afford, or else there's no way that I would have moved in there. The rent was like $400 a month, and in that location was really cheap. The apartment that I had was on the ground level and at the far end. It had 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a living room, and a kitchen. After moving in, I didn't have a problem with filling up the space with the furniture that I had, and I didn't even have that much stuff. For the first 2 or 3 days, things went fine. I was gone for most of the day at work and back by nighttime. One night, I went to bed at about 10 o'clock, only to be woken up in the middle of the night. Somebody was knocking on my front door. I looked at the clock, and it was midnight. I sat up and turned on the light for my bedroom. Why would anybody be knocking on my door at midnight? I got up out of bed and then walked out into the living room and turned the light on. I could sort of see that there was somebody at the door, but just saw their silhouette. When the light turned on though, they turned and walked away. I didn't get a good look at them at all. I went over to the door and looked out of it, but by now they were gone, and I didn't see anything. It was kind of weird, but I decided just to go back to bed. I was able to get back to sleep, and I'm not aware of the person coming back that night. I didn't wake up for the rest of the night. The next day was normal. I got up, went to work, and then came back home. That night, I fell asleep at the usual time of around 10 p.m. But once more, for the second night in a row, I was woken up in the night. This time, though, I wasn't sure what woke me. I didn't hear anybody knocking on the front door or anything. I turned over to go back to sleep, but I really wasn't that tired. I was wide awake, and I had a bad feeling for some reason. I sat up and turned on my bedroom light. Everything seemed fine to me. I decided to get up and go to the bathroom, and then try to fall back asleep. So I got up from my bed and walked over to my bedroom door. The door was closed, and I opened it to my living room and kitchen area. The living room was closest to me, and the kitchen was at the other end. The only light was coming from my bedroom, so it was kind of hard to see anything, but everything appeared to be normal. When I stepped out, though, I heard a noise. It was coming from my kitchen and behind the counter in an area that was not visible to me. I stopped where I was and looked over to the counter. Now my heart started beating really fast. I had no idea what that could have been. I said, "Is anybody there?" It was dead silent. I didn't hear any noise at all. I had no idea what to do in this situation. It sure seemed like somebody was in there, but I still was not 100% convinced. My eyes were just locked on the counter area where I had heard the noise. Then, a few seconds later, suddenly somebody appeared. They stood up from behind the counter and immediately started running towards my front door. It was probably like 15 feet away from them. It was still very dark, and I couldn't see them very well, but I was sure that it was my landlord. He made it to the door, opened it up, and then ran out of my apartment. I really couldn't believe it. I ran over to the door and then locked it, then went into my bedroom and called the police. I told them that my landlord was in my apartment in the middle of the night without permission. They came out and talked to me and said that they were going to talk to the landlord next. I went back to bed, and the next day got more information. The landlord admitted to being in my apartment. He also apparently was involved in other illegal activity. As a result, all of us tenants of his building had to move out, and the building went to new ownership. I'm not sure of all the details. All I know is that I had to scramble to find a new place. It was for the best, though, because I would much rather live in an apartment without the landlord entering as he chooses. This is something that happened when I was a kid, about 13 years old. I lived with my parents and two older siblings, both sisters. I remember that my father got a new job, and we had to move like an hour away. For me, it was exciting, but also kind of sad to leave our old neighborhood, especially at that age. Our new house I thought was pretty nice. It was in a neighborhood with lots of other houses, but we had a decent-sized front and backyard. We were not rich, but it had 2 floors and a basement. All 4 of the bedrooms were upstairs, and the main floor had a kitchen, dining room, living room, and family room. There were also a couple of bathrooms and closets. We moved in one day with the help of a moving company, and then spent the next couple of days unpacking boxes and stuff. By the following week, we were all moved in, and it was summertime, so luckily I didn't have school. One night during that same week, I stayed up late playing video games. This is something that I did a lot during that time. Everybody else had gone up to bed, and I was by myself on the main floor and in the family room. I really don't remember exactly what time it was, but probably after midnight is what I would guess. As I was sitting on the floor and playing video games looking at the TV screen, I saw something behind it. We had a window which faced the side of our house behind this particular TV. I saw somebody walk past outside, right by the window. I couldn't tell who it was at all, but it really took me by surprise. At first, I was wondering if I really just saw what I thought I did. Our house wasn't that close to the neighbors on that side that it would be the neighbor. I had a bad feeling about it. It seemed as though whoever it was headed into our backyard. I decided to get up and go look out of one of the back windows inside. I carefully went towards the kitchen, which was at the back end of the house. When I did, at first, I didn't see anything. I got up close to the window and looked out into the backyard. Everything seemed normal though. It was pretty dark in the backyard, but I could see most of it. I was wondering who the person was and where they had gone, but I was also glad that I didn't see them back there. After looking out the window for probably like a minute or two, I backed away. Then I headed back into the family room where I was before playing video games. Around the time that I made it back into the room though, I heard a rattling coming from the back door. Somebody was trying to open the back door leading from the backyard to the kitchen. Instantly when I heard it, I sprinted up the stairs. Then I ran all the way to my parents' bedroom. I woke them up and told them that somebody was trying to get in the house. My parents both came downstairs with me. When my dad turned on the light to the backyard, he saw the man running away. I didn't go over there, but I guess the man was by the house near the other back window and no longer at the back door. He ran out of the yard and through another neighbor's backyard before going out of sight. After the guy ran away, my parents stayed up for a bit, but the guy didn't come back. My dad went outside and saw some marks on the back door. I think the man was trying to get in. I went to bed a short time later and the guy never returned. For the rest of the time that we lived there, no more strange things like that happened either. I still wonder who the guy was and why he tried entering our house. For months, I was afraid that somebody else would try to break in. Luckily, nobody did though. This took place a few years back. During that time, I moved into a new apartment. It had 1 bedroom, 2 bathrooms, and was a lot nicer and larger than my previous one. Shortly after I moved in, I met one of my neighbors as I was going into the elevator. He told me that his name was Steve, and he seemed pretty nice. I remember that we talked briefly, and he said that he lived at the end of my hallway. At the end of our conversation, I remember Steve saying that we should hang out sometime. I was glad that I seemed to make a new friend so quickly after moving in. I wasn't really sure if I would hang out with him or not though. That day, I went off to work and then got back at night. I went straight up to my apartment and then went inside. Things were really quiet now that it was late, and I was hanging out sort of in the kitchen area. That's when I heard the sound of somebody walking down the hallway. The only reason I really heard it is because I was sort of by the door and my apartment was so quiet. For some reason, I was feeling curious, so I walked over to the door and looked out of the peephole. I just wanted to see who was walking by. When I looked out though, I saw Steve. He was standing there in the middle of my hallway and looking at my door. It was really strange to see this. After a few seconds, he started walking and I thought he was going to walk away. I figured that he was just passing by and going to his apartment, but I didn't know why he would stop. After he took a few steps, he turned and then walked back closer to my door. He got right up to it and I almost backed away, but I didn't. He was looking at my door super close. I was sure for a second that he was going to knock on the door or something, but he didn't. He was just there, right outside of my door. Then he backed up a bit and stood at the other side of the hallway. He was still looking at my door though. He kind of started walking back and forth, almost pacing around. I was kind of shocked at what I was seeing and didn't know what to think, but to be honest, it was really creeping me out. I didn't think he knew that I was at the door or anything. I decided to back away because I didn't want to keep looking. It was freaking me out too much. I tiptoed away from the door as quietly as possible. Then I went into my bedroom and quietly turned on the TV to distract myself. I couldn't take my mind off of it though. Still, there were no knocks on the door and he never tried opening it either. About 5 minutes later, I got up and went back over to the door to see if he was still there. He was now gone. I was glad to see that, but still didn't know how to explain what happened. After that, I went to bed. The next day, I got up and was heading to work. Believe it or not, I saw Steve walking down the hallway towards the elevator again. I felt really awkward seeing him. He smiled and said hi to me in a cheerful mood. I said hi and asked how he was doing. Steve said he was good and asked me what I did last night. I told him that I worked late and then just came home and went to bed. I found it odd that he asked me that, but then I asked him what he did the previous night. Steve told me that he had been gone all night and got back really late after midnight. I knew this wasn't true. I had seen him in the hallway, and that was at like 10 p.m. or so. I didn't ask him anything else, though. After the strange situation, I didn't want to confront him. For some reason, I didn't feel all that safe around him anymore. After that, we both went our separate ways, and I went to work. When I got home, I was a little concerned that something else like that might happen. I thought that I might want to try to avoid seeing him in the hallways or something. But the crazy thing is that I never saw Steve again after that. I kept thinking that I would run into him or something, but I didn't. After probably a few weeks, I had sort of got to know a couple of other people who lived in the building. One day, I asked one of them about Steve and if he still lived there. I was told that he didn't live here anymore, and he had been evicted several weeks back. They added that he seemed really strange to them. I didn't bother to tell them about my experience with Steve, but I found that interesting. I'm not sure why he was evicted, if he just didn't pay his rent or something else. Either way, I'm glad that he moved out. That was a very strange situation, and luckily, I don't have to worry about it anymore. This is something weird that happened to me a few years ago. I had just moved into a new house that I was renting. I was living alone by myself in a 2-bedroom house that had 2 levels. It was not all that big, but a good size for me. There was a small front yard and backyard as well, with a little patio. The neighborhood was pretty nice. There were a lot of other houses on it, but it really wasn't too crowded. After moving in, I had to get some furniture to fill in the space, but I thought that I would enjoy living there overall. I worked a job about 10 minutes away and really liked the city. Literally the first night that I moved in, though, something happened. I was upstairs, laying in bed. It was probably around 11 o'clock, and I was just on my phone until I got really tired. Everything in the house was quiet, and all of my lights were off. That's when I heard the sound of glass breaking coming from downstairs. I sat up, and my heart started pounding instantly. My first thought was that somebody was breaking in. However, after the glass breaking, I didn't hear anything else. I grabbed my phone off of my nightstand and dialed 911. I explained what had happened, and then I stayed in my bedroom until the police arrived. During that entire time that I was waiting, I didn't hear anything from downstairs. I had no clue if somebody was inside my house or not. When the police got there, they searched the house. I finally left my bedroom to talk with officers, and they told me that nobody was inside. They searched the entire property up and down. My kitchen window in the back was smashed, and glass was everywhere. I was told that it was likely broken with a blunt object. It seemed, though, that whoever broke the window just broke it and left. That was kind of strange to me, but I was really glad that they didn't do more. Nothing had been stolen, and obviously nobody entered my house. The next day, I got the window replaced. I got it as fast as I could because I was paranoid that whoever it was would return and try to break in or something. I got a new, stronger window, and the next night everything was fine. It took me a long time to fall asleep, but when I did, I was not aware of anybody returning to my property. The next day, everything was fine as well. I was still very curious, though, as to why somebody would smash my window in the middle of the night like that. Well, a few days later, I was in my living room pretty late at night. My living room was at the front side of the house. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, I heard a loud bang coming from somewhere in the back. It was coming from outside of the kitchen area of my house. I couldn't believe that this was happening again. Several seconds later, I heard another noise. I actually decided to go over and investigate. I walked around the corner just to look towards the back window. I was still a good distance away. What I saw was what looked like a woman walking away from my back patio and over to the side of my house. I quickly ran back over to the living room, got my phone, and called the police. Thankfully, my window hadn't broken, though. She seemed to try to break the same window that was broken before. As I was dialing 911, the woman came around to my front doorstep. Then, she started loudly banging on my front door. I did not answer. I told the police what was happening, and they said somebody would be there shortly. Afterwards, I moved towards the kitchen and away from the front door where the woman was. I really never got a good look at her at all, so I couldn't describe her well, but she remained at the front door. She continued to pound on the door on and off, but luckily she did not try smashing any more windows. The police arrived, and the woman was still there. They ended up questioning her, and she admitted to being the one who smashed my window. It was unclear why she did it though. I also found out that she lived just down the street from me and was a neighbor. That was really crazy. After that incident, I never saw her again though. I only lived in that house for 1 year before moving to another city. A few months ago, I got a new apartment. I moved into what I would describe as a pretty average apartment building. There are 4 floors, each floor with a couple of hallways filled with apartment units. I moved in after the lease at my old place was up, and this was certainly a step up from my old apartment. This one had several open units, and I took basically the first one that I saw. It was the second to the last unit at the end of a hallway on the 2nd floor. It had 1 bedroom and a bathroom, and when I moved in, I liked it a lot. On one of the first nights that I was living there after I moved in, I was in my living room. I started to hear loud music coming from the next apartment over, the one at the very end of the hallway. Normally, I wouldn't mind, but it was so loud that it was kind of shaking the walls. I couldn't even really hear specifically what songs were playing or anything. It was just like super loud music. I thought maybe even my neighbor was practicing guitar or something. I didn't think it would last for very long, but it did. It continued for hours until well past midnight. I was trying to go to sleep, and my bedroom wall was right against their apartment. With all of the noise, I just couldn't fall asleep. I really didn't want to do it, but I decided to go over and knock on their door. Surely they had to be reasonable and understand that they were making a huge ruckus. So I left my apartment and walked over to it. I knocked on the door loud enough for the person to hear, but they didn't answer. I stayed there for a few minutes and then knocked again. Once more, nobody answered. I was there for at least 5 minutes and realized that they were not going to talk to me. By now, I was pretty angry at whoever it was that lived here. I went in my apartment, wrote them a note, and then left it on the door. I told them that their music was too loud and I couldn't sleep, and they shouldn't do that so late at night. The music kept going, and eventually, after putting in headphones and laying in bed for probably another hour, I finally fell asleep. After work the next day, I got home to my place and was having a normal evening. I had almost forgotten about the whole situation the previous night. But at probably like 8 or 9 p.m., there was a sudden and extremely loud bang at my front door. That was followed by several more slightly quieter ones. It was like somebody knocked on my apartment door as loud as they could. When I went to my door, I looked out of the peephole to see nobody there. I did, however, hear a door closing not far away. I opened up my door to find a note on it. It was the same note that I wrote to my neighbor next door, but on the blank side of it that I hadn't wrote anything on, there were large letters that said F you. This made me really angry. I wanted to go over and fight whoever this person was, but I decided not to. I took a minute or two to cool down, and I realized that I didn't want to get involved in a war with my new next door neighbor. After all, I had just moved in. I decided to try to take the kinder approach first. I wrote another note, apologizing for being angry about the noise. I said a few other nice things as well, and I wanted to see what would happen as a result. Probably nothing, or maybe this would get stuffed back in my door. If that was the case, and the loud music continued, then I would have to think of something else. After I wrote the note, I taped it to my neighbor's door. For the rest of the night, everything was fine. I didn't hear any loud music or anything. No bangs on my door either. The next morning, as I was leaving for work, I opened my front door to find a note on it. I picked it up and read it. It said, "I'm sorry for the confusion. Please come over tonight at 9 p.m. I felt like maybe we were not on bad terms anymore. Maybe they wanted to have a conversation with me and we could talk things out. I still had no idea who lived there or what they looked like or anything. So that night at 9 p.m., I left my apartment and went next door. When I got to the apartment on the end, just feet away, I saw that the door was already cracked open a little. I knocked on it as I opened it up a little farther. Inside the apartment, it was pitch black though. Not a single light was on. I didn't really know what to make of this. Then I heard a man's voice coming from far away, deep inside the unit. He called out, telling me to come on inside. I pushed the door open a little bit more. I couldn't really see anything though. I also noticed that there was creepy music playing in the background of the apartment. It sounded like music that would be in the background of a horror movie or something. I didn't want to go any further. I left the apartment and walked back to mine. Whoever that guy was seemed to be really strange. Maybe that was his idea of a joke or something, but there was no way that I was going in there. I contacted the management of my apartment complex. I explained the whole situation, and I ended up switching apartments and moving to an open unit on the 4th floor literally the next day. It was also on the complete other side of the building. I moved all of my stuff, and I'm not really sure how they handled the situation with the guy, but I still currently live in the building. I've never gone near where that guy's unit was since, and I honestly have no clue if he still lives there or not. I'm glad that I was able to move out though.
I remembered that when I was about 10 years old, my family moved into a new house. We had lived in a smaller house that was about 10 minutes away. The new place was bigger and overall nicer in every possible way. In this house, I also got my own bedroom for the first time ever. In the past, I always had to share with my brother. Now my brother, my sister, and I all had our own rooms. My bedroom was in the back corner of the house, and I had a window that looked out to the backyard. On either the first night after we moved in there, or one of the first nights, I was in my bedroom and trying to fall asleep. I had just turned out all the lights, and it was completely dark. I wasn't really all that tired though, and I was there in bed with my eyes closed and hoped to fall asleep soon. That's when I heard a knocking sound. I really had no idea as to what it was. It wasn't coming from my window, but it sounded like it was coming from close to me. Other than the knocking, things were completely silent. I just figured that it was probably my brother in his bedroom, which was the next room over. He was probably moving something in his room, or else trying to mess with me by knocking on the wall. He would pull pranks on me sometimes doing things like that. I didn't even bother to figure out what exactly the knocking was, and I ignored it. Soon, I fell asleep. As far as I knew, it was nothing. The very next night, though, I heard it again. I couldn't sleep and was lying in bed just trying to get tired. Then I heard the knocking again. This time, I was more curious as to what the noise was. I found it really strange to hear it 2 nights in a row. The knocking continued for probably several minutes. At one point, I decided to try and figure out where exactly it was coming from. I sat up and listened closely. For some reason, I just couldn't figure out where the noise was coming from. I got up out of my bed and walked over towards the end of my room. Then the knocking stopped. I stood there for a moment. I just couldn't quite figure it out, and I went over and looked out the window. That's when I saw a man walking out of my sight. It was really dark back there, but the guy was probably only about 10 feet away from the house when I first saw him. He walked farther away and disappeared behind a large tree. Suddenly, I was really scared. I couldn't believe what I had just seen, and I didn't get a good look at the man at all, but obviously, I knew he wasn't supposed to be back there. My parents and everyone else was asleep, and I didn't want to wake anybody up. It seemed like the man was gone now, but I didn't know if he would come back or something. I decided to try and just go to sleep. I got back in my bed and laid down. After closing my eyes, it took quite a long time, but eventually I was able to fall back asleep. I didn't hear any knocking or any other strange noises for the rest of the night. The next morning, I told my parents about seeing the man in the yard. They seemed really surprised, and I remember that my dad went out into the yard and looked around. He said that everything seemed fine, and figured it was probably nothing serious. There wasn't really much that could be done at that point. The guy hadn't tried to break in, and I only saw him for a few seconds. Plus, we had no idea who he was. I just hoped that I wouldn't see him again, and I thought that that would be the case. But I was wrong. That very night, I once again got in bed and turned out all my lights. Within probably 5 minutes of that, I heard knocking again. But it was coming from my window this time, and there was no mistaking it. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I sat up and looked over to the window. A man was looking in, directly at me. Without hesitating, I jumped and sprinted out of my room. I ran to my parents' room and burst in, waking them up. By the time we got back to my room, though, the man was gone. I stayed up literally all night, and the police were called. After searching the property, they couldn't find him, and once again, nothing was messed up in any way. After this incident, the man didn't come back. I moved my bed into my brother's bedroom and slept in there for 2 weeks, and when I returned to my room, everything was fine. I still can't believe how the guy was right outside my window, though. I don't know who he was, or what he wanted, or why he was there. This is something that happened 2 years ago when I was in college. I had just moved into a new apartment. The apartment was a few blocks from campus, and I would be living there during the school year. It was a small, one-bedroom place, and not the nicest, but it was all that I could afford. I was sure that it would be good enough for me, and I was happy to live by myself. For all of my other years in college, I had roommates. I got the place in June, but didn't move in until August. My parents came down and helped me move all my things into my place. Shortly after moving in, and one of my first days there, I got a knocking on my front door. I looked out the window to the front step. There was a woman standing there. She was short and had long dark hair, and looked to be maybe in her 40s. I opened up the door to see what it was that she wanted. She said hi, and told me that she lived next door and saw that I moved in. She just wanted to say hi. Something about the woman immediately seemed a little bit off, though. I couldn't tell what it was exactly. Still, it was nice of her to come over and say hi, and I was friendly and said thank you. There was a few awkward seconds where she just kind of stood there. I broke it by asking how she likes living here. The woman said that she liked it and started to walk into my place as she was talking. I was confused seeing this, but after she got inside, she turned around and walked out only a few seconds later. Then she stopped talking and just stood on my front step. It was a really awkward experience. I told her thanks for stopping by and that I would let her get back to her place. She just kind of said okay and took a few slow steps off of my front step. After I closed the door, I looked out and she kind of stood around the front of my place for a while before walking back. I didn't really know what to make of it. Maybe she was just being nice, but was just a bit shy or awkward. It was odd, but not that big of a deal to me. But the very next day, as I was at home by myself, she came over and knocked on my door again. When I saw her there, I considered not answering, but she saw me walking by, so I decided to see what she wanted today. I opened the door, and the woman immediately asked me what I was doing. I was a little confused by this. It was another awkward interaction with her, and she didn't say much else, and soon walked back to her place. I just went back to what I was doing after that. And later is when things got really weird. Probably 2 days after that encounter, I was woken up in the middle of the night to the sound of somebody knocking on my front door. When I looked at the clock, it was 2:30 in the morning. Very carefully, I left my bedroom and walked over to my front door. After looking out, I saw the woman was there again. I couldn't believe it. What was she doing here in the middle of the night? I really didn't want to answer the door. I hid in a spot behind the couch where I could sort of see her, but she wouldn't be able to see me. She stood at my front door and knocked again. After I didn't answer, she appeared to try and look inside my window. She then moved to another window and looked inside. The woman kind of walked around on my front step before knocking yet again. Of course, I wasn't going to answer. This was making me worried though. I didn't know what she wanted, especially at this hour. Finally, she left. She was at my place for probably 10 minutes at least. I was able to go back to bed after that. The following day, I didn't see her at all, but the day after that, I did. It was a day that I had classes, and I decided to walk to campus. It took maybe 5 to 10 minutes to walk, and the weather was nice. When I left my apartment, I got out to the sidewalk with my backpack. Soon, I saw the woman, and she left her apartment and started walking down the sidewalk behind me, but she was pretty far back, like maybe 50 feet. I pretended not to see her, and ignored the fact that she was now walking towards campus behind me. She stayed behind me all the way there, until I got to the building that my class was in. When I got inside, I'm not sure where she went. She did not follow me into the classroom. When class was over, I didn't see her, and I forgot about it. I didn't see her for the rest of the day. In fact, after that experience, I didn't see her for over a week. I sort of forgot about it, but occasionally would remember. I wondered what was going on. Then, one day, I ran into another one of my neighbors. It was a man who lived in the apartment building, and I hadn't met him yet. We got to talking, and he asked me if I knew the woman who lived next to me. I said yes, and the guy told me that she had been arrested for breaking into another apartment unit. He said that he always thought she was strange and figured that she did a lot of drugs. That very well could have explained her behavior. I didn't end up seeing her for the rest of the time that I lived there. I think she moved somewhere else, because I noticed someone else moving into her place at one point. Last year, I moved into a new house that I was renting. It was a small house in a typical neighborhood. I would be living there by myself for at least the next year after starting my new job. The house was somewhat old, but in pretty good shape. Shortly after moving in, one night, I got a phone call randomly. It was really late, probably 11 p.m. I did not recognize the number, and I found this really strange, but out of curiosity, I answered it. The person on the other end sounded like a man, and he spoke in a deep voice. It sounded as though he was trying to disguise his voice, possibly. He said that I better get out of that house now. I figured he was referring to the house that I was in. Then, before I had a chance to say anything, he hung up. I was really confused and also creeped out. I didn't know who would do something like that. Possibly it was a prank of some kind, but I didn't know of anyone who would do something like that to me. I was left feeling really creeped out. But the person called back only a few minutes later. This time, when I answered, they said, "I'm serious. You better get out of there." He hung up again before I had a chance to ask who it was or say anything. I tried calling the number back, but my call was rejected. I was thinking hard to try to figure out who would do that. I thought that possibly it was a neighbor who saw me in the house and didn't know that I had moved in and was renting the place. Or possibly it was just a prank. They didn't call again for the rest of the night, and soon after I went to bed. But that very same night, I was woken up to the sounds of someone banging on my front door. They were pounding loudly on it, and it certainly would have woke anyone up. It startled me, and I got up and went downstairs. But when I got down there, it had stopped, and when I looked out to the front yard, nobody was there. Whoever had been doing it had left. But as I was looking out front, there was then a loud banging noise coming from the back door to my house. Whoever was doing it must have been basically banging their fists on the door as hard as they possibly could. This went on for a good 10 seconds before it stopped. I went around to the back and turned the light on, but I didn't see anybody there. They had left again. I stayed up looking out both my front and back windows and alternating between the two, but whoever was there did not come back. I considered calling the police, but decided not to. I ended up just going back to bed. The next morning, though, I went outside and inspected the areas where the person had been. There was no damage or anything like that. I called my landlord and told him about what had happened. He didn't really seem to care much, though, and just said to call the police if anything gets broken or damaged. I asked him if there had been any problems like this in the past, and he said he had no idea, but none that he was aware of. I wasn't really sure what to do. I went to work that day, and when I returned home, got my mail. There was this one letter in the mailbox that was hand-delivered. I know this because it wasn't even in an envelope. Really, it was just a piece of paper folded a few times. When I unfolded it, there was red marker that said, "Leave now," with a bunch of exclamation points. Somebody really didn't want me living there for some reason, but I didn't know why. The house wasn't super nice or anything like that, but this was enough for me. I contacted my landlord and told him that I wanted to move out, and I explained the situation. He was not happy about it and tried to charge me a fortune for breaking the lease. I ended up having to pay rent for the next 2 months, but I didn't even care. Luckily, I didn't have much furniture, and I moved out of there and found another place after less than a week. It was a nice little apartment, and I didn't have any problems there. I never found out who was responsible for calling me, or pounding on the door, or who wrote the letter. I also don't know why whoever it was didn't want me to live there, but luckily, I wasn't bothered by them again. I'm going to tell you a story that happened a couple of years ago. At the time, I was a 25-year-old female and had recently moved into a new apartment. I really liked it. In fact, I was on the wait list for the place for a couple of months. When I was finally able to get a unit there, I was really excited. I soon moved in, and not only was the apartment great, but the location was as well. It was less than 10 minutes from downtown of the major city that I live by, but far enough that it wasn't hard to get around. There was a nice park with a walking trail right by my place, and some businesses and restaurants within walking distance. This incident occurred the very first week that I lived there. After work one day, I went for a walk and then walked to a local place to get some food. Then I went back to my place and relaxed for the rest of the night. It was really nice outside that day, so I was glad that I got to spend some time outdoors. My apartment unit was on the second floor, and I left the door to my balcony open a little so the air could circulate. This proved to be a bad decision. I was woken up at about 2 o'clock in the morning, and I heard a sound coming from the balcony area. Then I heard my screen door opening, which is very loud when it moves. I was in shock and couldn't believe it. I didn't know how anybody would get onto my balcony because it was on the second floor, but there was definitely somebody there. After hearing the noise of the door opening, I didn't hear anything else for a little while. I decided to get up and look. Maybe there was an explanation of some kind. I walked to my bedroom doorway and looked out into the living room. It was completely dark because all my lights were off, but when I looked over to the door to the balcony, I saw someone. There appeared to be a man standing there, and he was just inside from the balcony. As soon as he saw me, he started to walk over. I quickly moved back and shut my bedroom door. Then I locked it. As soon as I did, I heard the man walking closer in my direction. Soon, he reached the door, and he tried opening it. I moved back and ran into the bathroom that was connected to my bedroom. This door also had a lock, and I went inside and locked it. Now, I heard the guy pounding on my bedroom door, almost as if he was trying to break it down. I called the police as I was in my bathroom. I was told they would be there within 5 minutes. As fast as that is, it seemed so long to me at the time. I was just hoping that I could make it that long. After pounding on my bedroom door several times, I didn't hear anything for about a minute. I was hoping that maybe the guy had left, until I barely heard his footsteps again. Then there was more banging at the door. It seemed to only get louder and louder. This continued for about a minute, until I heard what sounded like the door breaking. Only a few seconds later, it was confirmed to me when I heard the man walking in my bedroom. Soon, he came right up to the bathroom door and tried opening that, but after he couldn't get in because it was locked, he did not try breaking that door. After only 5 seconds or so, I heard what sounded like the man walking out of the room. He then left my bedroom and went back into the living room area of my apartment. I couldn't hear much after that. In fact, I didn't hear anything for a good 5 minutes until I heard footsteps in my apartment again. This time, though, it was the police. The man must have either heard or seen them arriving and left. But when I left my bathroom to see the police inside my apartment, they told me that they had caught the man. I saw my bedroom door all smashed up and broken, which the man had actually used my vacuum to break it down. The man had climbed up on my balcony from the one below. He didn't live in the building, but somehow he must have known that I did. Possibly he saw me when I was out walking. After that happened, I always slept with the balcony door closed and locked. Back when I was about 12 or 13, my parents and I moved into a new house. It was somewhat small, but in a nice little neighborhood near the city. I remember that we had been renting a house not too far away, and it took us a few days to move. We didn't have a moving truck or anything, and just used my dad's truck over the course of the last couple of days that we had the rented house. When we had finally moved completely into our new house, I remember that at night I was home with both of my parents. The house had 2 floors and a basement. My bedroom and my parents' bedroom was upstairs, and on the main floor was the kitchen, living room, dining room, and bathroom. My parents and I were just going to bed upstairs. I remember that I was looking for something, and I can't remember exactly what. I think it was like one of my pairs of shoes, but I couldn't find them in my room. It might have gotten lost someplace during the move. I went downstairs, and everything was dark because all of the lights were off and nobody was down there. First, I looked around near the front door. Then I walked over by the kitchen, kind of. I only turned on one dim light, and then I opened up a closet that was down there. But as soon as I did, I saw a man standing inside of the closet. I jumped back and started to run away. At the same time, the man left the closet and ran away to the left. At first, I thought he was chasing me, but he wasn't. I ran back upstairs and pounded on my parents' bedroom door. They came out and asked what the problem was, and I told them there was a man downstairs. I didn't want to go back down there, and I stayed upstairs as my parents went down to check it out. About 10 minutes later, they came back up and said that they thought the guy had left. At that point, I finally went back downstairs and looked around with them. The back door to the house was unlocked, and looking all around the closets and everything, the guy was nowhere to be found. I was glad to see this, and finally, we were all able to go back to bed. The next morning, after I got up, I was the first to go downstairs. It was a Saturday, so I didn't have school, and my parents didn't have work. But when I woke up at like 7 a.m., I just wasn't tired. As I was walking down the stairs, I was sure that I heard the noise of someone else down there. I thought it was one of my parents until I got to the bottom of the stairs and just for a second saw the man again. He came into my sight and then went out of it very quickly and went down into the basement. I ran back upstairs and once again woke up my parents. This time we called the police and all waited upstairs until they got there. As we were upstairs waiting, we didn't hear any noise at all coming from downstairs. When the police arrived, they entered the house and found the man hiding in our basement. None of us had ever seen the guy before. He hadn't stolen anything, but he had likely been inside of our house all night, which really creeped me out. The way that he got inside was likely the back door, which one of us must have left unlocked. We don't know how long he was in there either, but luckily he didn't harm anyone. This happened several years ago when I moved into a new apartment. I should mention that I'm female, and the place was older and on the edge of the city. During that time, it was all I could afford. The apartment itself was a small one-bedroom place on the 5th floor of a pretty tall building. I moved in with all of my stuff, which was only a few boxes, and started to unpack. For the most part, I liked the apartment because the location was pretty good, and it was enough space for me. My hallway had probably 15 or 20 other units on it. I made maybe 3 or 4 trips back and forth from my car to my apartment, bringing everything in. As I was doing this, and on the last trip I made, I saw a man leaving his room a little ways down the hallway. He was the first neighbor that I had seen. I finished bringing things in and then started unpacking. It took me basically the rest of the day to do so, and by nighttime I was all done. I didn't have to work for the next couple of days, so I got some food and stayed up late relaxing and enjoying my new place. I was up and watching TV when I heard a knock on my door. This was strange. It was almost midnight. I got up and walked over to the door, and I looked out the peephole. It was the guy who I had seen in the hallway earlier, one of my neighbors. It seemed a little bit strange to come to my door at this hour, but I decided to answer it. The guy was pretty tall, probably like 6'5". He had glasses and hair almost to his shoulders. When I opened up the door, he said hi to me. Then, he shook my hand and introduced himself. He told me that his name was Andrew, and he lived down the hallway. The guy seemed kind of awkward. The whole situation was kind of strange, but I thought that it was nice the fact that he came over to introduce himself to me. After I introduced myself back to him, we both stood there awkwardly for a few moments. Then, Andrew asked if I wanted to come over and have some coffee at his place. I told him no and said that it was late and I was going to bed. He asked if I was sure, and when I said yes, he said okay, and then I closed the door. Then I went back to what I was doing. I wasn't really that tired, but I didn't want to go to his place. I found it a little bit weird that he chose to come over and introduce himself to me so late at night. I stayed up for a while longer and then went to bed. The next day, I went out to get some groceries in the morning and was home for the rest of the day. I organized more of my things and did whatever for the rest of the day, but at night, once again, there was a knock at my front door. I got up and went to go see who it was. It was Andrew again. I opened the door to see what he wanted this time. Andrew said hi to me and then told me that he thought my mail got delivered to his place on accident. He said there was a package for me. I was a little bit confused, but curious what accidentally was delivered to him. He told me that he had it in his place, and he said we could go get it now. I said sure, and I walked out of my place and into the hallway. Then I followed Andrew down to his apartment. It was a few down from me and not that far at all. When we got to his place, he opened up the door and told me to go ahead inside. His place was somewhat dirty. He had a living room in the main area and then a bedroom off it, kind of like mine. As we walked inside, Andrew said that he kept the package in his bedroom for safekeeping. I followed him inside to the bedroom. When I got inside that room, there was far less furniture. Almost as soon as I walked in, though, Andrew suddenly moved behind me. The door then swung shut and slammed. My immediate reaction was to run over to the door and try to get out, but as I made it there, I heard a click, and when I tried opening it, the door was locked. I realized how stupid I had been. This guy already had come across as a little bit of a creep to me. How could I walk alone into his apartment late at night? I thought about how crazy his story sounded anyways. Why would he accidentally get one of my packages? I asked him what he was doing, but he didn't answer. I had my cell phone with me, and I pulled it out, but there was no signal in there. Nothing would go through. I'm not sure where Andrew went, but I didn't hear him from the other side. I looked around the bedroom. There was hardly anything in there. A mattress in the corner, a rug, and a nightstand. It was a terrifying place to be. His window had a cover on it. I pulled the cover off to see if I could see anybody outside, but the window seemed to be painted black from the inside. I couldn't see out of it, and I couldn't open it either. I was desperate. I yelled and asked to be let out, but nobody answered me. I walked all around the room, wondering what I could do. There didn't seem to be anything, though. As time went by, I realized that I needed to think of something to get out of there. I kept trying my phone, and I went to all parts of the room, but I just couldn't get any signal. Finally, I went over to one of the walls. This was a wall that bordered the apartment next door. I started knocking on it, wondering if the people on the other side would hear, or if they were even home or awake. But after several minutes of that with no luck, I turned it up a notch. I started pounding on the wall as hard as I could. It started to damage it a little bit. I then took my elbow and rammed it into the wall. Some of the wall ended up breaking, and I started yelling as loud as I could and banging on the wall. After a minute or so of this, the door to the room that I was in opened. Andrew stood there inside the doorway. He yelled at me to stop, then he started approaching. I grabbed the small nightstand because it was the only thing in the room that I could grab. I held it up to defend myself. This didn't stop Andrew at all. He kept going towards me. I shoved the nightstand at him, which pushed him back a little bit, and this was just enough for me to be able to run past him and out of the room. I ran for the door, which I was barely able to get to before he grabbed me. I had the door open, but Andrew was struggling to keep me inside. I heard somebody walking down the hallway, though, into our direction, and I started screaming as loud as I could. When the person got closer, Andrew pushed me away, then he himself took off running out of the apartment and down the hallway. The person in the hallway told me that they lived next door and they were wondering what on earth was going on. I explained to her the situation as I ran back for my apartment. The police were called, and Andrew was long gone by the time they got there. However, they were able to locate him not too long after that. I'm really lucky to have gotten away, and I'm especially grateful that the neighbor decided to come over and see what was going on. When I was a kid, probably about 10 years old, my family moved into a new house. It wasn't that big of a move, but maybe like 10 minutes away from where we had lived before. My siblings and I didn't have to change schools, but the neighborhood was different. When I was a kid, I loved to be outside. Probably my favorite part of our new house was that it had a basketball hoop in the driveway. I had always wanted one, but our old driveway was too small, and the car took up most of the space. My brother and sister did not like to go outside as much as me, so I would often be out there by myself. Our house was bigger than our old one too, and the neighborhood was busier. I was hoping that I would meet some of the neighborhood kids and make some friends. I remember that shortly after moving in there, I was outside playing basketball in the driveway, and I saw a guy walking by down the street. The next day, I saw him again. I figured that he was one of the neighbors, and he lived on our block. I remember noticing that he looked at me both times as he went past. Then, one day, I saw him walking down the street for the third time. This time, the man stopped at the end of our driveway and faced me. I wasn't really sure what he wanted. I kept playing basketball and looked over every few seconds or so to see if the guy was still there. He didn't move. After maybe 2 or 3 minutes, when I looked over, the guy waved at me. I waved back, but I was a little bit confused. The guy was wearing sunglasses, I remember, and for the most part seemed pretty average. He then waved me over and said hi. I started walking down the driveway to the guy, and when I reached him, he asked me if my family had just moved in. I said yes, and the man told me that he was my neighbor. He asked me how old I was, and then he told me that he had a son around my age. He said he was always trying to get his son out of the house, but he mostly just liked to stay inside and play video games. He told me that his kid would probably play basketball with me, and asked if I wanted to come over and meet him. It sounded good to me. I would have loved to have a friend to play basketball with, and I told the man sure, and he told me to follow him. We both began walking down the street to the right. When we did, I expected it to be maybe a few houses down or something like that. I thought about telling the man that I had to let my parents know I was leaving. They had always told me that if I was going anywhere to ask them or to let them know, like if I was going to the local park or something. However, I felt like that would be an inconvenience, and I decided not to. We made it past a few houses, and then I saw that there was this one car parked on the side of the road. It was literally the only car that was parked on the side of the road. Most of the houses in the neighborhood had garages or longer driveways as well. There wasn't really a need to park on the street. I saw that the man was walking closer to the vehicle. This gave me a really bad feeling. Had he driven his car here? The car was a gray minivan. It was kind of old looking, I remember that. I just knew that I didn't want to get into a vehicle with this guy. My parents had always told me not to go anywhere with strangers. I thought this man was a neighbor though, and that didn't really seem like a full stranger to me. Then, as we got even closer to the van, sure enough, I remember hearing the lock click like it was unlocking. The man was holding keys. He told me to hop in when we were maybe 10 feet away. This is when I decided that I was not going to get into the guy's car. I turned right around and sprinted as fast as I could back for my house. The man did not chase after me. I think I had really taken him by surprise. I also don't think there was any chance that he would have caught me. I made it back home, ran up the driveway, and went back inside the house. For whatever reason, I didn't tell my parents about it. I think that I didn't want to get into trouble. I was much more careful when going outside after that as well. Luckily though, I never saw that man again. I believe 100% that the man didn't even live in our neighborhood at all. This story takes place when I had just recently moved into my new apartment. A really bizarre thing took place. This was almost 2 years ago now, but I will never forget it. My apartment that I was moving into was pretty new. The building was less than 10 years old, and it seemed really well maintained. It also wasn't that big. There were only a few units in each building, and there were 2 buildings total, then an office. There was a parking lot in the middle where basically everybody parked. My apartment had 1 bedroom, a bathroom, a kitchen, and a living room. There were also 2 closets aside from the one in my bedroom. One was a standard coat closet, and the other was more maintenance, like for my water heater and things like that. After I moved all of my stuff in, which took forever, I started putting everything where it belonged. I had a moving company help me get everything transported and up to my unit. I was on the 2nd floor, so it wasn't too bad. So the very first night, when I was setting everything up and whatnot, I was putting some things in my closet. I was trying to decide where to put everything, and at one point, I went inside the utility closet. When I was in there, I was just looking around, kind of wondering what I would put in it. I happened to notice something strange though. There was like a panel on the back corner, kind of behind the water heater. I've always had a good attention to detail, and I almost didn't even notice it. This panel was rather large, and it was almost all the way on the floor. I got down on my hands and knees and examined it. The panel almost looked like a door that opened up through the wall. Beyond that wall was the next unit over. I wondered for a moment if that's in fact what it did, but I realized that didn't make much sense. There was no handle to open it or anything like that, and when I messed around with it a little, it didn't seem that weird. I left it alone and went back to work. I was able to get a few more things organized before I called it for the night. Later on, I went to bed at probably about 10 o'clock. In the middle of the night, I woke up. I remember being wide awake and wondering why I had awoken. Normally, this didn't happen. Everything was pitch black and silent. After a few moments, though, I heard a noise. I just barely did hear it. It sounded like somebody was inside my apartment walking. I laid frozen in bed. I couldn't believe what was going on. I thought to myself, remembering if I had locked my door, and I knew that I did. Then I remembered that thing I thought looked like a door that led to the next unit over. Could that have been real? Who lived over there? Meanwhile, the footsteps got closer. Then my bedroom door started opening. I closed my eyes and pretended to be asleep. There was nothing else I could do. I was just hoping that nothing bad would happen. Whoever was in there walked inside and took a couple of steps. Then they stopped. They stood there and didn't seem to move. This went on for a good 2 or 3 minutes. I couldn't take it anymore, and I opened my eyes. I couldn't tell who it was, but it appeared to be a man. He was standing about 10 feet away inside of my bedroom. I couldn't make out any details because of how dark it was. I closed my eyes again and just hoped that whoever this was would leave. I was confident that I hadn't made a sound and that they thought I was sleeping. Finally, whoever was there turned around and left. They walked out of the room and then back towards where they had come from. I did not hear my front door open and shut, but I did hear that closet door open and close. This confirmed it to me. I laid there for the longest time. It took me a while before I could do anything. Finally, I got up and checked all around my apartment. Everything seemed to be in place as it was when I left it. I went back to bed after that. The next day, I got up and went straight for the office. The apartment only had a couple of employees. I spoke with a woman at the front desk and let her know what had happened. She seemed pretty confused. When I confirmed to her my unit number, she told me that nobody lived in the unit next to me. I couldn't believe this. The apartment staff decided to come out and examine it. When I showed it to them, they offered to cover it up, but I made the decision to just move. This was really creepy to me, and I have the suspicion that it was somebody who worked at the apartment complex who was inside my apartment. If the unit to mine really was vacant, the staff would be the only ones with the keys. I'm not sure who exactly it was, but I just wanted to move out of there. Most of my things were still kind of packed up, and that's exactly what I did. To this day, I still wonder about that. This is my horror story about when my wife and I moved into our new home a couple of years ago. I remember when we first looked at the house, we both loved it. The neighborhood was great, and the inside of the house was also really good. We knew that we would have to be fast in making an offer, and we did. It was a sort of high price, and we had to make a full price offer, but the house was just too good to pass up. We had already looked at many houses, and this one was by far the best. The sellers ended up accepting our offer, and we were excited to move in. We thought that living there was going to be great, but soon, strange things started happening. I remember within probably a week after moving in, my wife and I were awoken to the sound of a knocking coming from the front door. I got up out of bed and looked at the clock. It was 2 a.m. This was very strange. I told my wife I would go down and check it out. The knocking continued. I was hearing it still as I was walking down the stairs. When I got to the bottom of them, though, it stopped. I walked over to the front door and looked out. Nobody was there. I opened the door and looked around, but I couldn't see anybody. Whoever had been there must have left. I looked out into the street, but didn't see or hear any vehicles driving away either. I went back inside and back to bed after that. This was a strange and bizarre thing, but we figured it must be someone at the wrong house or something like that. But later on, maybe a few days later, during broad daylight, there was a knocking on the back door of our house. Both my wife and I were home then as well. We were in the kitchen, which is at the front side of the house, so we couldn't see it. It was strange for somebody to knock on the back door instead of the front. I walked over to see who was there, but by the time I got within sight of it, I couldn't see anyone. Once again, I opened the door and I looked around our backyard, but saw nobody. My wife watched out the front windows, but she didn't see anybody walking over there either. We wondered if the 2 times were the same person. I felt like it probably was. But that wasn't the end of strange things happening. Several days after this, my wife and I returned home one night to find that our mailbox had been run over, it appeared. It had fallen over and was laying on the ground. After this incident, probably a week went by of normalness. Nothing strange happened, at least not that my wife and I were aware of. Then, one night, we were both at home sleeping. I woke up at some point during the night, and I heard the sound of something hit against our bedroom window. Our bedroom was on the 2nd floor, so this was really weird. I sat up and listened. It happened again. It seemed as though something was being thrown at our window, like maybe a rock. I walked over to the window and looked out. I didn't see anybody. By this point, I was really frustrated with all of this going on. I kept watching out the window, waiting for whoever was there to show themselves, but I couldn't see them anywhere. They probably saw me at the window. There was also a good number of places that they could have been hiding, and with it being dark out, I couldn't see very well. I stood there for like 10 minutes, but never saw anybody, and nothing else was thrown towards the window. After that, I went back to bed again. The next and final incident came 2 days later. It was the weekend, and I was up late, much later than usual. My wife had gone to bed, and I was finishing up some work downstairs in the living room. Most of the lights in the house were off. It was after midnight, but I'm not sure exactly what time it was. I just randomly glanced out the window though, and when I did, I saw somebody actually walking up the driveway. They weren't looking at me, and I don't think they could see me. At first, I couldn't tell who it was, but as they got closer, I recognized them. It was our next door neighbor. I couldn't believe it. I ducked down just to be sure that he wouldn't see me. When he got near the front door, he knocked on it. I walked over right away to confront him. When I got to the doorway, I saw him out the window looking at me on the other side. As soon as he saw me, we made eye contact. Then he ran away. Now I knew who had been doing all of this. I was really in shock. I didn't know quite what to do. After that night, I decided to go over and talk to him the next day at his house, but he didn't answer the door. Nothing else that was strange happened after that either. He ended up moving out of the house about a year ago. Last summer, I moved into a new house with my wife. We bought it for a pretty good price, and the house was ready to move in and didn't need any kind of work. One of my favorite things about it was the big yard that we got with it. We were a little more out in the country, but had over 5 acres of land, including a decent-sized woods in our backyard. We knew that we could get deer in our yard quite a bit, and possibly other animals like foxes or bears as well. On just our 3rd night living there, we went out into the little patio area behind our house, and my wife and I were sitting out as the sun set. Eventually, it became completely dark out, and we turned our light on that we had back there that shined towards the woods. We started to hear a noise coming from the woods when we did. The entrance was about 100 feet away. We saw some tree branches moving and expected to see an animal run by. But then a man started to walk out from the woods. He looked like some random guy, and he just stood there looking at us. We both stared at the man for a while, and eventually I yelled out to him asking who he was. He kept standing there staring at us though. I decided that it would be best to tell him he was on private property and he needed to leave, but when I did, the man didn't seem to care. He just kept standing there, and eventually, he slowly walked back into the woods. I thought he was finally leaving, and when we didn't see him again for a few minutes, we went back inside for the night. I don't think the man came back at all that night, but the very next night, we were both inside the house. When I passed by one of the windows in the kitchen, I noticed that the same man appeared to be in the entrance of our woods again. It was like 11 p.m., and later than he had been there the previous night. He was just standing there, staring at our house. I watched him for probably a whole 5 minutes. It was really strange and creepy. Eventually, I decided to open up our back door and yell at the man to leave. I walked over, and as soon as I opened it, I saw the man turn to the other direction and run back into the woods. I kept watching the entrance of the woods for a while, but I never saw him come back, and finally I went to bed. The next morning, I woke up to a strange noise though. I couldn't quite tell what it was, but it sounded like water was running somewhere. I got up and went all around the house, and when I made my way to the back of the house, I realized what it was. The water outside our house that was for a garden hose was turned on full blast and was flooding our little garden area. Thankfully, we didn't really have anything planted there yet, but someone had turned it on in the night, and I thought it was probably the guy that kept walking in our yard. I didn't really know what I could do though. I didn't want to call the police yet because he hadn't really done anything that bad. I decided to just keep a watch out on the backyard at night. But when that night came, thankfully I didn't see the man at all. I thought maybe he was done bothering us, and I went to bed. The next morning when I got up, I didn't hear or see any strange noises, and everything seemed to be in order, until I got out to leave for work. When I got to my car, I saw that the right front tire had been slashed. Now I was really mad. Whoever this guy was had really crossed the line. I wanted to know who he was and what he was doing. I had a little bit of time before I had to leave for work, so I decided to walk into the woods and see where this man was possibly coming from. I had walked out in the woods twice before when we were touring the property before we bought the house, but it was a really dense woods and was easy to get lost in, so I don't really remember everything. I went out and there was sort of a walkway or unofficial path that went about 20 feet in, and then things got more narrow. I went out there and went to the left and followed a little trail deeper into the woods. Not really sure what I was looking for exactly, but I was really mad. And when I got about 2 minutes down the trail, I suddenly heard a noise about 50 feet up. I froze and looked. I saw the guy, and he was standing behind a tree up ahead. He looked like he possibly had a knife in his hand, but he wasn't looking at me. He slowly turned and started to face me, and when he did, I started sprinting as fast as I could in the other direction. I ran off the path and was running into tons of tree branches and probably stepped in a bunch of poison ivy. I felt as though I was running for my life, and I kept going until I was finally out of the woods and back in my yard. I ran all the way to the driveway and saw that my wife was outside and about to leave for work. I told her to get inside her car, and I got in with her. We then drove away down the street. Once we were a safe distance away, I told my wife what had happened, and we called the police. The police arrived at my house and found that the man had been living in our woods for a while. He was caught, thankfully, and I guess he clearly didn't like us living there for some reason. We were just happy he was gone and wasn't able to hurt us. I travel a lot for work and have to move from one city to another quite often. A few years ago, I was moving to a city in Northern California. I was going to live there for about a year and then probably have to move again. The house that I got to rent was a nice, smaller house in a pretty normal neighborhood. It was sort of old, but I'm not picky and I liked it just fine. Over the first few weeks of living there, everything was good for the most part. I was gone a lot with work, but when I was home, it was a comfortable place to live, and I thought the neighborhood was nice as well. Like I said before, the house was old, and it had some older looking kind of ugly wallpaper and designs in some areas of the house. I would have liked to take it down, but I was only renting it, so I thought maybe I would just let it be. The wallpaper was mainly in the living room, and then went down the hallway to where the bedrooms were. One day I got a few pictures to hang on the wall, and they looked good, but I just really didn't like the way the wallpaper was looking with it, and I decided once and for all that I was going to remove it. I had to get up on a ladder to reach it, and when I did, I first looked at it closely, and right away it seemed a little bit odd. It was a black and green design, with black on the top and green on the bottom, but the texture was not like most wallpapers. I ran my hand across it, and the top part of it was extremely thin. The texture also felt different. Then I decided to grab the top part of it and see if I could peel it off. It took a little bit of effort, but I was able to get part of it off. When I did, I noticed there was like a 3-inch tall space behind it. I kept taking it off, and the space was running right along the top of the wall. I was confused as to what this space was, and I had never seen anything like it before. I noticed a sort of wire on the back side of it. The space also seemed to go back about 6 inches or so, and had several holes on the top, leading between the ceiling and the second floor of the house. As I was taking more of the wallpaper off, I got about a foot of it off before I found something else too. There was a tiny little camera that was mounted behind the wallpaper at one spot. It looked like it had been set up to film inside the room. When I kept removing the wallpaper, I found another camera. I kept going and found that there was another one on the other wall as well. They seemed like they were in tiny holes in the wallpaper, with these cameras basically impossible to see unless you were right up next to them. I was shocked at what I had found and also really creeped out. I wasn't sure at that point if someone who had lived there in the past had done this or if my landlord had set them up. If he did, he was a real creep, but either way, I didn't feel comfortable at all with them being there, and the fact that the cameras were plugged in made it even more creepy to me. I didn't really know what to do, but for the time being, I decided to unplug all the cameras I found and put them in a box so they couldn't record anymore. I was sort of paranoid to move around the rest of the house now, because I was afraid that there were possible cameras everywhere. I decided that the next morning I would call my landlord and tell him about it. That night, I fell asleep easy, but it wasn't too much later that I woke up. The first thing I heard after being awake was the sound of my front door opening. I looked around and saw that it was dark outside still. A really bad feeling came over me. I knew I had locked my door at night, so I wasn't sure what was going on. I listened and heard someone walking around downstairs. I waited in my room for a while to hear if they would go away or what they would do. I heard them for a little bit, and then I stopped hearing any kind of noises at all. I thought maybe they had left, so I slowly exited my room. And as quietly as I could, I walked down the hall and down the stairs. After I had gotten to the bottom of the stairs, I could now see that around the corner, my landlord was inside my house. His name was Dave, and his back was facing me, so I don't think he saw me at all. I quickly went to the back of the house and left through the back door in the kitchen. Once I had made it back to my car that I had parked on the street, I called the police on Dave. Then I drove to my coworker's house, who I had become good friends with. I ended up having to go back to the house later to talk with police, and when I did, they told me they had caught Dave, and when they found him, he was inside my bedroom. That really gave me the creeps, and I'm glad I was able to leave when I did. The cameras were all his, and he had set them up himself. I guess when they all turned off, he came back to my house that night with a key that he had. It was a really creepy situation. I bought a new house last year and moved into it a few weeks later. The house was really small, but it was just going to be me living there. Once I moved in, things were very normal for the first week. The house itself had 2 bedrooms. They were both upstairs and also had 2 bathrooms, one upstairs and one downstairs. In the downstairs, there was a living room and a kitchen as well. The house also had an unfinished basement. On the second week of living there, I woke up in the middle of the night one night. This normally never happened for me, so when I woke up, I sat up and looked around. It was dark out, but I heard a noise off in the distance. I couldn't really tell what it was, so I got out of bed and walked to my bedroom door. Then I pressed my head against it. When I listened, I heard a sort of laughing noise. It sounded really creepy. It sounded like one of those scary clowns that was laughing in a really creepy way. I couldn't really tell where it was coming from, though. I thought it might be from outside. When I left my bedroom, though, and started down the stairs, it sounded like it was coming from inside my house. All of a sudden, I was really scared. I followed the noise, slowly walking through my house, trying to be as quiet as I could. I was wondering what it could possibly be. I got all the way to the entrance of the door leading down to the basement, and realized that's where the creepy laugh was coming from. The door was open about a foot. I looked through it, and it was pitch black down there. But I know I could clearly hear the creepy laugh of a man coming from down there. I was so freaked out by that I ran all the way back to my bedroom quietly and then shut the door and locked it. I stood there against the door, hearing the laughing noise, but I felt unable to move. I really didn't know what to do. I was wide awake and couldn't go back to bed. I didn't have any other place to go, and I certainly wasn't going to go downstairs. I thought about leaving, but was afraid to make too much noise. Eventually, the laughing stopped. I felt a little better then, and I listened. I looked at the time, and it was nearly 5 a.m. I didn't hear sounds of anybody moving around the house or anything like that. I stayed there by my door for another hour, and it was silent the whole time. Eventually, I did get tired again and was able to go back to sleep. Thankfully, I didn't have to be up early the next morning. When I finally woke up again, it was about 10 a.m. I walked out into my living room, and nothing was out of place. I slowly went around my whole house, and everything was fine. I didn't see anybody or anything different. Finally, I decided to go into the basement. I was pretty scared to do this, but I knew I had to. I went down the stairs and then turned on the light. It was a dim light and didn't help much, but I could see around. Since I had just recently moved in there, I hadn't gone in the basement much, and I hadn't put anything down there at all. I looked around, and the whole place was empty, and nobody was there. Except in the middle, on the ceiling, there was one red balloon with a ribbon attached going down. I ran back upstairs after that and called the police. They came out and searched my house after that, but found no one. After that, I never heard any more strange noises in the house or anything like that. I have no idea who was down there that night. Last year, I graduated college and got a job in another state. That meant moving out of my parents' house and into my own place, living all by myself for the first time. I found a nice little house in the city that was very old, and I moved into it several months ago. It wasn't very big, and I didn't plan to live there for too long, but it was a nice place to live while I started my career. Like I said, the house was small and old, but it had 2 stories. The upstairs was just a couple of bedrooms and a bathroom, and the downstairs was the kitchen, living room, and another bathroom. I enjoyed living there until about a month ago. I was sitting downstairs one night at about 8 p.m. and watching TV. I heard footsteps coming from the upstairs hallway. Because it's an older house, the floor creaks fairly loudly upstairs when you walk on it, so I knew there was no mistaking that noise. It really freaked me out because I live alone and nobody else had a key to my place or anything. I sat up in my chair and muted the TV so that I could hear better. I heard the footsteps go down the hall to where my bedroom was and then stop. I continued to listen, and about a minute later, I heard them walk back towards the base of the stairs, which I couldn't see from where I was at. For some reason, I was feeling a bit brave that night, and I decided to slowly walk over to where I could see the top of the stairs to find out who was there. When I got around the corner to the kitchen, I didn't see anybody at the top of the stairs. I psyched myself up and then slowly walked up the stairs, but each step I took, I felt more and more fear. When I got to the top, I looked down the hall, but still didn't see anybody. First, I went down the hallway and into my bedroom. I stepped inside and looked around. That was empty as well. I searched all around, even in my closet and whatnot, but nobody was there. Then I walked back out of my room to the hallway and looked in the bathroom, which was also empty. After that, I entered the other bedroom in the house, which I didn't really use and was kind of an office for me. When I opened the door, the first thing that I saw was a man halfway out of the window, and then he disappeared. I ran to the window and saw him run behind a nearby bush and then down the street behind my house. I looked around my house to see if anything was stolen or messed up, but pretty much everything was in place. I didn't know who it was or why they would break in, but I reported it to the police. I hadn't gotten a good look at the man other than his body type, so I really wasn't much help to them. 2 days later, I was up very late watching Netflix on a Friday night, which is sadly not all that uncommon for me. It was probably close to 3 in the morning, and I was about to head off to bed when I heard a knock at my door. It wasn't just a typical knock though, it was a constant loud knock that didn't stop at all. I got up and walked over to the door to look out the little window and see who it was. As I got about 5 feet away from the door, the knocking suddenly stopped, and when I looked out the window, I saw no one. I even opened the door a crack to look around, but still saw nothing. Whoever it was had left, but I stayed on alert for the next few minutes. Finally, I was able to forget about it and go to bed. I have no idea if these two incidents are related at all, but I'm starting to not like living here so much and have begun to look at different houses. This story took place a few years ago. I'm a female and was moving into a new apartment just outside the city. I wasn't a huge fan of it, but it was all I could afford at the time, and I knew it would only be temporary. The place was pretty old and run down, but had good character to it. However, strange things started happening pretty much right after I moved in. I remember the second or third night I was there, I woke up one night and saw that the door to my bedroom was wide open. That was strange because I was sure I had closed the door the night before. It had always been a habit for me to do so, but I figured somehow I must have forgot or something. Several days later, it happened again. Another thing that happened was items in my room or other objects in my house would seemingly be moved, misplaced, or even missing. I thought maybe I had been sleepwalking or something, but I had never been known to do that. I just didn't know how to explain what was going on. I became more and more careful to lock my doors and close them, and I started to be alert to my surroundings. That's when I started to hear things, mostly just late at night. I would hear the sounds of footsteps occasionally in the other room, or things being moved at the other side of the apartment. Most of the time I would just stay in my room because I was honestly too scared to look, but the times that I did peek out of my room, I never saw anything. The noises never lasted that long, and I started to think that I was just being paranoid. I really wanted to move, but I was stuck in a lease, so I tried to just ignore everything. It was almost every day that something strange would happen. Then my brother came into town for 2 weeks for a business trip and asked if he could stay at my place. I was more than happy to let him stay there. I let him sleep on my couch in the living room for free during the time, and in those 2 weeks, nothing strange happened at all. But almost as soon as he left, all the weird stuff started back up again. It was maybe 3 or 4 nights later that I woke up in the middle of the night to hear a noise from inside my room. I looked up and this time saw a man standing in the doorway of my bedroom. I recognized the man to be my neighbor who lived in the apartment next door to me. I had only met him once when I first moved in, and I never saw him much but would occasionally see him in the halls. When he saw that I was awake, he quickly disappeared behind the doorway. Then I heard him running away. I ran to my door to shut it, but when I got there, I saw him going into one of my lower large kitchen cabinets. This confused me, but I figured he was just trying to hide, so I went back into my bedroom, slammed the door shut, and called the police. I put my dresser in front of the door trying to block it, and the whole time sat in front, listening if I could hear the man, and hoping that the police would arrive soon. They arrived about 10 minutes later, and I came out and told them everything. The next-door neighbor, who was a middle-aged man named Vic, was arrested. The police found that in my lower kitchen cabinets, the same ones Vic had gone in, there was a secret door that led to his apartment, and he had been using it to constantly go back and forth to my apartment and spy on me. They also found several items of mine that he had stolen in his apartment. It explained all of the strange things that had been happening to me, and I no longer had to worry about them after that. When I was 11 years old, we had just moved into a new apartment one July. The first few months was fine. Nothing bad or scary ever happened, but then things started to get a little suspicious. I used to open my window to let some air in whenever I felt like it. When I did, there would often be an old man passing by my window. I believe the old man lived in another apartment complex close to me just because of how often he would walk by. This would happen all the time, but one day, my mom randomly walked into my room, telling me to lock my window if I haven't already. She then said something that really creeped me out. She told me a few weeks ago a man was shining a light through mine and my brother's window while we were sleeping. It made me think of the old man that was always passing by and how I had left my window open before. That really gave me the creeps. When I was about age 9, my family and I moved to a new city due to my father getting a new job. When we first looked at the house, I got an off feeling about the place, but I just shrugged it off thinking it was nothing. The day we moved in, everything was normal, until I woke up that night at 3 a.m. to hear someone doing the dishes. I was very confused, thinking to myself, who would be doing the dishes at this hour? I decided to go check it out. As I was making my way to the door, my gut suddenly told me to get back in my bed. As I turned around and got back in bed, the door flew open as if someone was trying to break it down. I slowly opened my eyes and saw that nothing was there, so I closed my door and went back to sleep. The next couple of weeks, everything escalated. I would constantly wake up at 3 a.m. to hear someone doing the dishes or the chairs being dragged around back and forth in the kitchen. I would sometimes even hear people's voices saying goodnight. One night, my grandmother came over to visit, and she slept in my room on an air mattress. As always, I woke up at 3 a.m. This time my eyes darted to the closet for some reason, and I saw a dark figure appearing to be a woman. She asked what my name was. I was so scared that I jumped to my grandmother's bed on the opposite side of the room. She woke up startled. I pointed to the closet, and she looked at it for a second. Then she grabbed my hand, and as she opened the door, I felt something push me to the floor and everything went black. The next day, I woke up in my closet with my door shut. I walked out and my grandmother was nowhere to be seen. I went outside and asked my mom where Grandma was. She was confused and told me Grandma never came over. She even proved it by FaceTime calling her. At that point, my heart stopped and I started crying. Days after that, I started to have dreams of the woman dragging me into the closet. I'm still not sure how to explain those memories. I used to live in this old apartment when I was younger. It was really an old house that was converted into a duplex, I guess. I had a kitchen, living room, bedroom, and bathroom. Then there was a staircase going down to a very small entryway and the door. The other side, I guess, had basically the same thing, but I didn't know who lived there or anything. So I lived in this apartment for several months. It was cheap and pretty close to my work. Other than that, it was nothing special. I never knew anything strange to happen over the course of the first month that I lived there. I pretty much would be at work a lot, but when I was home I never had any problems. But then there were a few nights where I realized I was waking up in the middle of the night. I just know that I woke up and then went back to sleep pretty much right away one time. Then, another time, I woke up to what I thought was a noise, but I didn't hear anything more after waking up. I remember sitting up in bed and listening closely, but did not hear anything at all. So eventually, I just went back to sleep. This was strange because I normally slept really well and never woke up in the night. These were situations that I didn't even necessarily remember during the next day. But then, when I woke up in the middle of the night for a third time in about a week, I was sure I heard a noise, and I found it really strange. Once more, I sat up and listened, but I didn't hear any more noises. I couldn't figure out if I was dreaming the noise or if it happened when I was awake. It just seemed pretty strange. But after a while of nothing again, I finally fell back asleep. I wasn't really sure what was going on or what was the cause of me waking up. But then, one of the very next nights, I remember that I woke up again. I don't really remember hearing any noises, but I also was like wide awake immediately after waking up, which was weird. I didn't sit up, but rolled over to my other side. I was looking in the rest of the room, which was completely dark, but I then heard a small creaking sound. It was as if my bedroom door was being opened slowly. I looked over and saw that it was. Then I saw somebody suddenly enter the room from the doorway. It was a man, but I couldn't make out any details. The guy took a step into the room, but did not advance any farther. I was literally too scared to move. It was so dark that I'm not sure if he knew I was awake or not. The man then took out some sort of camera and took a picture of me. Then he disappeared back behind the doorway, going into the hall. I honestly couldn't believe it. I didn't know what on earth was happening. Then I heard some creaking from the floor in the hallway, and I heard a noise like a door being opened and closed. It was quiet but noticeable. After that, everything went completely silent again. I sat in bed without hearing anything for probably the next 10 or 20 minutes. I wasn't sure if I was being robbed or what, but I hadn't heard any noises in a long time. I finally got up and walked around my bedroom. There still was no other sounds, and then I left and went out into the hallway. I turned on a light and did not see or hear anything. Then I went around every room slowly and looked around. My place really wasn't that big, so it didn't take me long to realize that the other person was gone. But when I got to the end of the hallway upstairs, past my bedroom and across from a closet, I realized what must have happened. There was a door leading to my next door neighbors. However, this door I was told was not in use and was always locked. It even had a small table with a lamp on it in front of it, and the door was painted the same color as the wall, so it wasn't really that noticeable. But I knew that had to be where the person had gone. For some reason, the door must not be locked on the other side. After that, I couldn't sleep. I stayed up the rest of the night. In the morning, as soon as I was able to, I contacted the management for my place. I reported what was happening, and I started looking for another apartment immediately. The next few nights, I stayed at a friend's. Long story short, there was a man who lived next door, and he was caught. I'm happy that he never got in my place again after that. The times I had been waking up must have been when he left to go back to his place, possibly when he was closing the door. I will never forget seeing him in my room. It was the creepiest situation that's ever happened to me. This is a bizarre experience I had a couple of years ago. During this particular time, I was looking for a new apartment. I had been living with a roommate in this really run-down, beat-up old place. I had recently got a new job and finally had a little money to get a place all to myself, and a place that would be nicer as well. The kind of apartment I wanted did not have to be perfect, but I certainly wanted something better than I currently had. This would only be my second apartment that I ever got, and the first by myself. I was excited about it and looked online for the new place. I was still pretty new to living in this general area and had moved there from another state when I got my apartment with the roommate. So I went onto an apartment search website, put in my budget and preferences, and looked through the results. After looking at some apartments online, I selected one that I wanted to take a tour of. It seemed like a really good deal and looked decent from the pictures, so I contacted the management for a tour. I filled out some forms and then was ready to look at the place a couple of days later. When the time came for the tour, I drove to the apartment complex, which was maybe 10 minutes away. However, after entering the complex, I was unimpressed, and I realized that I may have made a mistake even by selecting to have a tour. I had pretty much already made up my mind that I didn't want to move here. Overall, the place really didn't look any nicer than where I currently lived. The pictures online were real, but they sure made the place look a lot better. Still, I got out of my car and met the tour guide, which happened to be the property manager and landlord. I think he really did just about everything. We met, and he said that he would give me a tour of the unit because the people had just moved out. So I went inside with him, and the apartment building smelled old and musty. Inside the place, the carpet was old and beat up, and there was a spider web with a spider in it in one of the cupboards. The guy was talking really good about the place, as if it was super nice. He mentioned that he lived in the unit next door, and we would be neighbors. I was nice and stayed there for the whole tour. When it was over, the guy asked me if I would take the apartment. I said that I had to look at others first, but would let him know if I wanted it. He did the old salesman technique, saying that he had a bunch of other people interested in the unit, and he even said that he had it on hold from them so that I could tour the place. I didn't know if that was true or not, but I knew he was trying to pressure me. He said he had rearranged things so that I could take the tour, so he hoped that I would take the place. I told him that I could not agree to it right now, And if he had to give the apartment to somebody else, so be it, but I had to look at some other ones. The guy seemed disappointed, but then we said our goodbyes and I left. So after this, I knew I wasn't going to move there, and I went home and continued my search. I decided to raise my budget and realized that I could actually afford something a lot nicer than that dump. The next day, I received a call from the landlord of the apartment I had just looked at. I answered, and he asked me if I was going to take the place. I told him that I decided I was not going to be taking it and would look elsewhere. The man sounded very upset. He said that he had it on hold for me and claimed that he lost other renters because of it. I told him I didn't know that, but I never made a promise that I was going to move there, and I wasn't going to do it. After that, the man continued talking and said that he could possibly lower the rent for me. I still said I wasn't interested. I honestly had no desire to live there, even if it was free, especially knowing that this guy would be my next door neighbor if I did. The guy asked me why I didn't want to move in. I found it strange that he was still talking to me about this. I didn't want to talk to the guy anymore, so I told him that I was just going to look in another area, and then I said bye and hung up. The whole thing was very strange. It was pretty unprofessional, to be honest, but it would get more unprofessional. So that evening, the guy called me again. I don't remember the exact time, but I think it was around 7 p.m. or so. It was really strange. I couldn't imagine what he could possibly want. I didn't answer it, and when the ringing ended, he did not leave a message or anything. The next morning, when I woke up, I noticed that my phone had actually been called another time. He had called in the middle of the night at like 2 a.m. I was hoping that this was just an accident, but this time he did leave a message. When I played it, he simply said that he was trying to get a hold of me and to call him back. I didn't want to, so I blocked his number. I thought that was the end of it, and I would never see him again or hear from him again. That story is strange enough as it is. But a couple of nights later, I was at home with my roommate. I was in my room, and it was sometime at night, maybe 8 or 9 o'clock, and then there was a knock at the door. I didn't know who it could be, but I was possibly expecting somebody to be there to see my roommate. I knew that I wasn't expecting anyone, so I stayed where I was. But a few moments later, my roommate came to my doorway and asked if I invited a guy over. I said no, and she said that some guy was at the front door. At first, I really had no idea who it could be, so I walked over to the door and looked through. The same guy was standing there. It was the landlord from the other apartment building. I had no idea what he could possibly want. As I was standing there, he knocked again. I shouted from the other side, asking what he wanted. He asked if he could come inside, and I said no. He then said that he would only come inside for a minute. I said that if he didn't leave now, I was going to call the police. The man finally cursed at me, kicked at the door, and then stormed off. And after that, he luckily did not come back. I still don't know why that guy kept bothering me. I figured that he got my address on the forms that I had to fill out to look at his apartment. I wish that I never looked at that place at all. I ended up getting a much nicer place a short time later, and have been living there since. This happened back sometime in the very early 2000s. During this time, I was living alone in a one-bedroom apartment that I had recently moved into. I was aware of a few of my neighbors, but not many of them. The building seemed to have people moving in and out quite often. It was a larger apartment building that had a giant parking lot next to it where all the residents parked. The apartment itself was pretty old, and not the nicest, but it was all right. So after a few months of living there, I remembered that one night I heard this sort of pounding noise coming from the next apartment over. I wasn't sure what it was. I knew that it was my next door neighbor though. The noise went on and off as it got later and later. Soon I was trying to go to sleep, but the sounds kept going. I had a hard time falling asleep because of it, and eventually I couldn't take it anymore and I had to go over there. I really didn't want to, but I was left no choice. So I walked over and then knocked on the door. After a few moments, a man opened the door. He was a large man that was bald and wore baggy clothes. He looked at me confused and slightly annoyed. I told him that I was trying to sleep and I was hearing him do something. I asked him if he was hanging stuff on the walls or something like that. The man said no, he was building a table. I guess that made sense, but I asked if he could quiet down because I could not sleep. The guy looked really annoyed but said okay and then shut the door in my face. I felt really awkward after, but it was almost midnight, so I went back and the man did stop and I was finally able to get some sleep. The next I saw of the guy was actually the very next day though. It was nighttime once again. Now I was about to go to sleep. Out of nowhere, I heard this really loud music coming from next door. It was the same guy's apartment. I rolled my eyes when I heard it. I just hoped that it wouldn't last for very long. The walls in this apartment were pretty thin, so noise traveled, but still, this music had to be almost full blast, and it continued until past when I wanted to go to sleep. I didn't want to go over to his place for a second night in a row. I wondered if this was his way of getting back at me or something. I mean, he knew that he was being loud. So I tried my best to sleep. I didn't have any earplugs, but I tried covering my ears and stuff, but I just couldn't. After trying to fall asleep for over an hour and the music still continuing, I realized that I had to go confront the man. So I left my apartment and I walked on over. After knocking on his door, he did not answer. I waited there for maybe 2 or 3 minutes, knocking several more times. Soon it was clear though that the guy was not going to answer me. So then I headed back to my place. I went back inside, hoping maybe the guy would eventually turn it off, or I could get some rest anyways. Just after making it back to my place though, I thought I heard a door open and close from the hallway. Then, moments later, I heard somebody trying to open my apartment door. Luckily, I had locked it right away when I got back in, which was a habit. This seemed strange, so I went over to check. The man was standing right there. I did not want to open the door because I had a bad feeling. He remained there for a few moments, just standing there and looking angry. Then he turned around and walked back to his place, with the loud music still playing. He did not turn it off. I don't even know when I fell asleep, but when I woke up the next morning, the music had been stopped at some point. After that, I reported the guy to the apartment, but I guess he moved out a very short time later. It was good because I didn't have to deal with him anymore. That was the craziest memory of living in an apartment. We shared a small 2-bedroom house together just outside the city. I didn't know the guy until I moved in, but I didn't have any money and I needed a roommate to afford renting the house, so that was the only reason that I lived with him. We both paid half the rent of the house, and the place was not very nice and pretty cheap. The guy's name was Ben. When we first moved in, we seemed to get along decently. For the first few days, we mostly just stayed in our own rooms or were gone at work. I did run into him in the kitchen once and we talked briefly. He seemed alright. However, about a week or 2 into living there, and one night I was awoken to the sound of somebody banging on my bedroom door. It was loud enough to wake me, and it continued, so I called out asking who was there. I figured that it had to be Ben, because who else would be in our house? The knocking stopped at that point, but nobody responded to me. So I got up and I walked over to the door, but when I opened it, nobody was there. I looked down the hallway and Ben's door was shut. I figured he had done it, but I didn't know why. Maybe it was a prank. He just didn't seem like the type of guy to pull that kind of a prank though. I went back to bed at that point. When I got up, Ben had already left for his job, and I forgot to talk to him about it anyways. But the next night, basically the same thing happened again. I once more was awoken in the wee hours of the morning to a banging on my bedroom door. This time I was more frustrated, and I called out, "What?" The knocking stopped, and I got up and ran to the door and opened it. When I got there, nobody was in the hallway again, but I looked and saw Ryan's door closing. I went over and knocked on the door, but he didn't answer. I asked what his deal was, but he still said nothing. I thought about barging into the room and giving him a piece of my mind, but I decided not to. I just walked back to my room and returned to sleep. Maybe Ryan was a sleepwalker and that was the explanation. Although sleepwalkers don't generally act that way as far as I'm aware. They're not called sleep pranksters. So the next morning, I wanted to confront Ben, but once more he was gone when I woke up. That night, again, I was awoken to a knocking. This time, I got right out of bed and marched over to the door and opened it. When I did, Ryan was standing right there on the other side. He looked at me, and I asked him what his problem was. Ryan then shoved me backwards before running off to his room. I went after him and tried opening his door, but it was locked. I banged on it for a while, but he didn't answer. So then I just went back to bed again. I was planning on finding a way to move out as soon as possible. The next morning, Ben was not gone yet. When he left his room shortly after I got up, I confronted him. I asked him what on earth he was doing. Ryan said flat out that he didn't like me and he didn't want to live with me. I told him that I was going to move out as soon as humanly possible. Within a few days, I had found an apartment and moved there, which was good because I didn't like living in that house anyways. The apartment was more comfortable. In the meantime, Ryan did not bang on my door at all for the last few nights that I lived there. Looking back, Ryan was definitely a strange guy. I'm not sure if he was trying to scare me out of living there or what. He could have just told me that he wanted me to move out and we could have handled it like men. There was no reason for the crazy nonsense that he did. I'm glad that I found an apartment so quick.